Good morning, everyone. My name's Jennifer Robbins. Welcome to Session 8B, Vulnerability, Distrust, and No Fellowship. Existential encounters between older patients with acquired deafblindness and caregivers. I'd like to introduce Daniel Prowse. Daniel is a specialized nurse and PhD. He works with professional development and research at Signo Konrad Svendsen Center in Oslo, Norway. Daniel recently finished his PhD thesis at MF Norwegian School of Theology, Religion, and Society, focusing on existential care to older patients with acquired deafblindness. His work experience comprises many geriatric care with an emphasis on deafblindness and dementia. He has worked in the field of deafblindness since 2005. Please welcome Daniel.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for your interest in my research. I would like to firstly to describe myself a little bit. I'm a middle-aged man, 184 meters tall. I've blue eyes and light brown hair with a little bit gray in it, I have to admit. So I wear a blue jeans, black sneakers, and a black shirt. And now I realize that I'm a pretty boring guy. So welcome again. So I recently finished my PhD, and it was about existential care to older patients with acquired deafblindness. I wrote my master's degree about what is good care for this population. And when I asked older persons with acquired deafblindness, what is good care for you? They kind of emphasized the existential things. And with existential, I mean the hidden things. We expected that they talked about communication skills of the professionals. We thought that they would talk about you must have good time, but they talked about other things. They talked about let me be in nature, let me be in contact with my creativity, let me feel belonging. So I was pretty surprised about these results, and then I got further in my PhD thesis about these existential things. And then I wanted to find out what is existential care. When do you experience things which are existentially significant for your life, and how can we help you to experience these things? So therefore, my presentation is entitled Vulnerability, Distrust, where the dis is in brackets, and No Fellowship, where the no is in brackets. Existential encounters between older patients with acquired deafblindness and caregivers. I want to start the presentation with a quote. Care is a state in which something does matter. It is a source of human tenderness. This quotation is taken from a book which is called Love and Will by the American existential psychologist Rollo May. And in his book, he especially emphasizes the existential significance of care in the human experience. And I think this quote says everything about it, what life is about and what care is about. So he gives care a significance in our life. The overall aims in my study was to explore the experiences of older patients with acquired deafblindness with receiving existential care, as well as nurses and chaplains' experiences in providing existential care to this patient group. And when I talk about caregivers in my presentation, I mean especially nurses and chaplains. So, why is this study important? Why is this study important, especially for the deafblind? Well, deafblindness is unknown, still unknown in society and also in healthcare. Deafblindness is often misunderstood, and many still believe that deafblindness only means living a life in complete darkness and complete silence. However, as this definition shows, deafblindness is described as a combined vision and hearing impairment of such severity that it is hard for the impaired senses to compensate for each other. We have talked about definitions the last 2 days. There's a Dutch definition, we have a Nordic definition, which I just read for you. And it's important to look at these definitions and to look at how we see deafblindness and how we define it. And here it is clear, it becomes clear in these definitions that deafblindness can be many things. And this means that persons with deafblindness not necessarily experience life as darkness and silence, but that they must cope with the chaos of sensory fragments which are in their perception of the world. So many older people acquire deafblindness due to so-called common age-related changes, and other people age with previously acquired deafblindness. But overall, most individuals with deafblindness are in the older population. The population is generally aging. We have good treatment, we have good care, and we are getting older, every one of us. And so we have the baby boomer generation, which soon will follow. So I don't know if someone is feels targeted now, but we will meet a significant increase in the number of older people and also older persons with acquired deafblindness and other disabilities. So we have to deal with it. And this implies also that these patients are not only found in specialized units, but that the healthcare system encounters them increasingly in various settings, such as hospitals, nursing homes, and in home nursing. And there we have a lack of knowledge, especially about deafblindness, as a distinct disability. So research shows that sensory loss in general gets little attention, and for example, it is rarely documented in healthcare records. And therefore, older persons with deafblindness are often remaining unidentified and undiagnosed. Symptoms are often misinterpreted, and some are even incorrectly diagnosed with cognitive impairment or even dementia. So let us talk about the existential, and don't be scared about the term. It's a big word, it's a big term, and there are many ways to define it, but I will explain my context. But research shows that people with deafblindness often struggle with existential challenges. And these existential challenges can be social isolation, loneliness, depression, a lack of self-esteem, and identity challenges. And we know all that. But in general, older individuals also tend towards such existential challenges. So this is not unique for the deafblind people. It's also normal for everyone who gets older. And in addition, many older people struggle with physical, functional decline and reduced resilience. So that make it that make these challenges even worse. So that again means that older individuals with acquired deafblindness need care that addresses their existential needs. But research says little about what existential care means for this group. So, the existential, what is that? What does even the term existential mean related to healthcare? Recently there was a Norwegian research team who published an article, a review article about what the term existential means in research. And they have developed a new definition about the existential or related to healthcare. What does the existential mean related to healthcare? And I will read this definition for you. You will see the keywords on the slide. They write, the term existential related to health refers to the fundamental basic condition of being a human. The existential is based on the irrefutable fact that we live and will die. We will face conditions and uncertainties along the way beyond our control. The existential is expressed primarily through a quest for making and seeking meaning in life in general, as well as in demanding life situations. This may involve movements between suffering and reorientation, and meaning and meaninglessness. Existential concerns can be integrated into both religious, secular, and spiritual worldviews. So, what does this theoretical definition say about practice and practical healthcare? So I've done a little bit research in the literature about how can I relate this definition to healthcare practice. And I found some definition which say something about what existential care can mean in nursing practice, for example. So it can be a caregiver's response to a patient's deeply human demand when life becomes unbalanced and struggling, regardless of their worldview or ideologies. It can be the support to find meaning again after significant change in life, which is a very central task in existential care. And here it is important to emphasize that it is not about the meaning of life, but meaning in life. What can we do that life is meaningful for me, but not the meaning of the wholeness of life and of the existence? And this can be done by conversations, consolation, or by supporting the patients with rituals. Existential care is also defined in practice as to be integrated within all caring acts by the way how care is performed. It's about attitudes, it's about what I say, it's about what I do and why I do it, and it's about see the other person. And this also means that an experience of providing and receiving existential care is rooted in what caregivers and patients experience as existentially significant in their lives. And that goes both ways. What does the patient mean about significance, existential significance, and what does the caregiver define as existentially significant? So now we come to my concrete studies. In my PhD, I had 3 sub-studies. In study 1, I interviewed 4 older patients with acquired deafblindness. In study 2, I interviewed 6 nurses, and in study 3, I interviewed 5 chaplains for the deaf. The patients in study 1 were between 62 and 74 years old, and they had been diagnosed with deafblindness. They lived at their own homes, and they received regular healthcare services. And they all communicated in spoken Norwegian language with the help of some technical aids. The nurses in study 2, they had a work experience within care for deafblind people, and older deafblind people especially. And the chaplains in study 3, they were recruited through the deaf church in Norway. So they had their own congregations, and additionally, they had, in a way, outreach activities and visited the patients at nursing homes, at hospitals, and in their own homes. So to get access to their experiences with existential care, I asked the patients, what are your experiences with receiving existential care? I asked the nurses, what are your experiences with providing existential care to older patients with acquired deafblindness? And the same questions I asked the chaplains. So I did not define what I mean with existential care, because I wanted to find out what is existentially significant for you in your life. So I didn't want to define what existential care means, because it can mean so many things. So I did an analysis, just briefly about this. I did a phenomenological, hermeneutical text analysis. So I transcribed the interviews, and I did this analysis, which was based on a French philosopher called Ricoeur. This took some time, but it was very interesting. So after that, I took each study for an analysis, and after I analyzed each study and published a paper about each study, I synthesized the 3 studies under one to get a whole picture of what the participants said about existential care. So when I now present the results or the findings, I won't present each study, but I want to present a whole picture of the 3 studies. But I will use examples from each study to exemplify what I mean. And from synthesizing the 3 studies, I found 3 overall themes. And these 3 themes were experiencing fellowship, feeling vulnerable, and trusting others. Experiencing fellowship. So here the participants talked about the kind of mutual bonds through a kind of empathetic approach to each other and the mutual connectedness. The patients could experience fellowship. They talked about being moved by the care they received, and by the connection they got with the caregivers. And the caregivers said the same thing. They also talked about being moved by the fate of the older patients and their suffering. So the nurses and the chaplains experienced such bonds as, they said, extraordinary relational experiences, and a nurse experienced it like breaking a code. So she said, it's a kind of flow. I talk with the patient and I know he understands me and I understand him. So there's a flow in communication and there's a flow in the care. It was also important utilizing the remaining hearing and sight and use tactile and haptic communication and see it together. So use the what is relevant in this communication, and a mixture of different communication strategies, individually adapted. For the nurses and chaplains, it was also important to show fellowship by accompanying the patients through their suffering, being with them in their suffering. This involved confirming the patient's negative feelings and opening up for new perspectives in a life with deafblindness. Open up for new possibilities, building a bridge from a life in loneliness to a life in participation, finding meaning in life. So it was also very relevant here with individual adaptation for participation, especially for communication, as I said. In Norway, existential care is regulated by law. So we have a regulation in law which is called the dignity guarantee. And this dignity guarantee ensures older patients the right to discuss existential themes with healthcare professionals. And this regulation aims to ensure that geriatric care is arranged in such a way that it contributes to dignified, safe, and meaningful aging, aligned with the individual needs. Now I show you a picture, and on the picture there is an old woman, somewhat wrinkled, with a checkered blouse, blue, yellow, white, orange. She is sitting and leaning at her kitchen table, looking out of the window and folding her hands. We see a part of a white plant pot with a plant in it, and we see a white curtain with a light pink lace. But what is most striking for me is that the woman's facial expression is sad. She looks very sad and she looks lonely. So I chose this picture to demonstrate, because it matched very good with the chaplain's narration in my interviews. So the chaplain talked about an old, very unhappy woman he visited, and he told her, "Just be sad and tell me more about it if you want." And during their next meeting, the woman said to him, "Last time I was so depressed and you said, just be sad. Simply that made me very happy." So we see that this is very important. It is very important to talk with people, being open to conversation, being container for patients' worries and acknowledge them. That is existential healthcare, and that contributes to older persons' existential well-being. And this is what the dignity guarantee is about. On this picture here, we see the same woman looking into the camera and leaning her chin on her crossed arms on the table, and she smiles open-hearted. There was another story of a patient, and the patient told me, "I attended a church service, and I had an interpreter. And the interpreter interpreted the church service in a way that I felt I was experiencing it by myself without an interpreter." So she communicated with him, and in a way, in a holistic way. She sang the hymns. She used tactile and haptic communication and oral communication. And she managed and mastered to give him the feeling that she, as an interpreter, was not there. And he said to me, the man said to me, "I felt to come home to my faith." So he was Christian when he was a child, and he was not Christian anymore. But when he had this experience with this interpreter, he felt like coming home to his faith, and he became a Christian again because of this experience. This is communion. This is existential care. In addition, the interpreter was a Muslim, and this made it even stronger, because the Muslim interpreter managed to give him this experience as a Protestant Christian, as a Lutheran Christian. So this was a very strong experience for the man and me as an interviewer. So I struggled to be a neutral researcher there. So, next theme, feeling vulnerable. I want to also say that these themes, they overlap each other. I just had to find a way to show you, but that's not borders between the themes. They overlap each other and complement each other. The patient's vulnerability was revealed in the narrations about the encounters with healthcare providers, where the patients did not feel fellowship. Instead, the patients felt that the uncertainty that deafblindness brings was either not acknowledged or misjudged by the caregivers. So the patients experienced a loss of self-determination and autonomy. And this became, for example, apparent in a patient's narrative, where a nurse clearly and repeatedly signalized that the patient should wear a safety vest when going out for a walk. The patient did not want to wear this vest, and he felt treated like a child by the nurse. So this is an example how the patients could feel underestimated. But they could also feel overestimated when they apparently managed life with deafblindness well, and others therefore did not adapt to their communication and to their needs. And this could again lead to social withdrawal and a feeling of loneliness. Also, the nurses talked about loneliness, and they described their impressions of their encounters with the patients with words like emptiness, exposedness, and defenselessness. One nurse said that they're just sitting there in a waiting mode. They wait all the time. So I have to do something. And it also turned out that nurses and chaplains themselves could feel vulnerable. And that was quite interesting. So the nurses, for example, they did not share their experiences with colleagues. They felt that it was important to have a relational approach to the patients, but they feared to be labeled as crazy when they shared this with their colleagues. So this was a kind of private care they provided when they provided existential care. They didn't want to talk about it. And the chaplains, they experienced vulnerability due to limitations in providing existential care. They had feelings of insufficiency and not having done enough for the older patients. Feeling vulnerable. One patient told a story about how he grew up, and he was visually impaired as a child already. And his parents told him, "You will never get a job, and you will never get a girlfriend, and we will save some money for you that you can be buried at our grave." And he got this story from his parents as a child, and he said to me, "From that moment I began to fight. From that moment, I wanted to be a normal person. I don't want to be underestimated. I'm a normal person, and the world must adapt to it." The third theme was trusting others. The chaplains told, especially the chaplains told about situations when they met older patients, and the older patients were meeting them with distrust and skepticism. And that was because of experiences from previous meetings or previous encounters with healthcare, where they experienced a breach of trust. So it could be that especially when you are vulnerable, when you are deafblind and you meet a person for the first time and you experience distrust, then it may be difficult to build up this trust again. The chaplains experienced it like that, and they said that it took a long time to build up trust, and it took many, many encounters to get into their existential challenges and to talk about private things. And the patients they talked about the power imbalance in the relationship with their caregivers. I'm a nurse and you must wear the safety vest. So in my study, a nurse talked about a frail man with severely limited hearing and sight, and she visited him at a nursing home to evaluate his needs for rehabilitation. I will now read a quote about how the nurse experienced the encounter with this patient. And her quotation describes at the same time the picture I show you here. The nurse said, "I moved to tears thinking about meeting him. I entered his room and there was kind of nothing, only silence and emptiness. No kind of approach, nothing visual. Everything was white and sterile. No pictures, no sounds, no people. There were holes in the walls. It was very cold. The patient was wearing a hospital dress and lying flat in the bed with both bed rails up. It was a very strong experience. He had lost life. His existential foundation was gone. As a human being, I felt that I had to do something about his situation." So I think this quotation can exemplify how a person can lose coherence, significance, orientation, and belonging, all that what is important to experience meaning in life. The nurse was moved to tears and by the patient's fate, and this activated her to care for him. So she then described that she held eye contact with him and that she talked to him in a way that she knew the patient would understand, because she knew he had residual hearing and residual sight, which the personnel at the nursing home didn't know. She said that the patient had to trust her and feel taken seriously. And she said that this required a mutual relation through understanding and reacting to each other's expressions, to facial expressions, physical expressions, to emotional expressions, to each other's nature. So in this picture we see the same man who was lying in the white sterile room, but now he is sitting on a chair in a kind of common room, and he's wearing a blue-white checkered shirt, and there's a rollator placed in front of him. In the background we see a woman doing the dishes, and the man leans his head on his left hand and he's smiling. And the nurse I interviewed, she continued and she said, when this man was admitted to us, he was described as old, bedridden and demented. And with our support, he rose to an alert, communicating, flourishing man. To see this hope, resources and possibilities was a very strong experience for me. So I think with this description and this quotation of the man's situation after the rehabilitation process, the nurse described how she and the whole team understood the existential care and the existential approach to restore the patient's coherence, significance, orientation, and belonging, to give him meaning in life. It's about seeing the person, the nurse said, not the disease. So these were my findings. Before I conclude, I want to show you a model. Still, in institutions, in care institutions, the biopsychosocial model is the foundation for a person-centered existential approach. So this model shows 3 circles: body, spirit, and mind, which are partly overlapping. Body, spirit, and mind, the physical, the spiritual, and the psychosocial. These parts overlap and complement each other. So I got to know Janice Clark. She's a nurse and midwife, and she's a former lecturer at the University of Worcester. And she proposes an interesting new perspective on existential care. So she means that this model is not describing good care, because these parts, they don't interact, they just overlap. And she says that nursing is much about the body, and the existential is much about relating and connecting. So she proposed a new model. And this model shows an overlying dynamic and interpenetrating part with constant movements between the parts. So the model shows one circle where the parts, body, spirit, and mind, are in a kind of observed in a relating movement in one circle. This model must be seen as a moving spiral merging body, spirit, and mind into one existential dimension. So if one part is affected by something, the other parts are automatically affected. And this means, according to Clark, that in nursing practice, this dynamic model evolves in every day, in everything nurses do, by the way they do nursing. So everything you do has significance for the patient. So, just concluding, what have we learned? What have I learned from my study? I've learned that the way of meeting older persons with deafblindness can be crucial for an experience of existential care. I have learned that mutual connectedness, mutual relational bonds are essential for such experiences, both for the caregivers and for the patients. So we are talking so much about the deafblind world, the hearing-sighted world, and yes, we all have our own world and our own perception of the world, but there is just one world, and we must make this world accessible for the patients, for older patients with acquired deafblindness. We must make it accessible on their premises. And maybe we can do it by showing and acknowledging others' vulnerability, inviting to social and spiritual fellowships, and giving and having trust. I've learned that the way to use touch and to support hearing and sight tactile and haptically can be positive in supporting existential needs. And I think if this relational contact is lacking, it can lead to feelings of rejection, distrust, and loneliness. So the model I presented is just reductionist, and it cannot mirror entirely human life, but it can be a new perspective on the existential dimension, and hopefully help to improve understanding and practicing care to older patients with acquired deafblindness and maybe other disabilities. So I have some implications, but I think I will finish my presentation now. If you want to, you can read my dissertation. So if you are interested in these things and want to read anything more about it, just contact me. and I want to finish my lecture as I began, because it sums up all the things I talked about. Care is a state in which something does matter. It is a source of human tenderness, and I think we have to acknowledge and understand that. Thank you for your attention.
Are there any questions in the room?
Thanks very much, Daniel. It's very interesting. I'm just wondering if your research showed any kind of correlation between the not addressing these existential markers to the overall mental health of these people that were enrolled in the study. It seems to me there would be a direct correlation between ignoring sort of the existential part of the human being, that there would be a severe downward slide in their own mental health. And did the research show that, or is that not an area you went to?
The challenge was that I had a qualitative study, and I interviewed just a few persons, so I can't generalize my findings. But of course, I can maybe hope or think that it's the same for people with other disabilities, or for all of us. We all have existential needs, and we all need to get our needs adapted to our lives and to the world. So it will be the same for all persons, I think, but for persons with disabilities and for persons with deafblindness, it means something special. And I tried to grab these special things, and I was concerned about the unique experiences of this one person in this one situation. So I can't generalize it, but it serves as an example for how this kind of care can be provided. So, but I understand what you mean, and I think we all can relate to it. And I think if we all can relate to it, you have the answer. This is my answer to your question.
Daniel, thank you very much for your impressive and heart-touching speech. You told about the dignity guarantee in Norway. My simple question is there enough time in all-day life for realizing existential care?
No. Of course not. The problem is complex. The issue is complex because it's one thing is to use this word existential. There are used many words as spiritual care or holistic care, person-centered care, but I think all of these words mean kind of the same thing, and it's difficult to define these things. And when it's anchored in law, we have to find out what does it mean. Where every institution has to find out what do we do with this law text, and how do we secure the right to have existential talks and existential conversations with our patients. So I think it's important that that institutions, that leaders, and that groups sit down and talk about that, and how can we practice what we have in this law. But we can argument with this law. We can say that we have this law, and we have to do it in practice. So I think this is very important. And here the responsibility is at the, I think it's at the leader level.
Yes, I have a question. Hello, my name is Divya, and I myself am deafblind. And I have a lot of experiences in America, and I've seen a lot of things and related with a lot of deafblind people and senior citizens, and they have no access and their needs are not met. There are no laws for provisions, etc. And in addition, senior citizens feel, who are deafblind, very isolated, and they have zero support. There's no activities going on, and so that happens in the U.S. They can't afford many things monetarily, and so many families are just really...
They're shunning them. The families are not meeting these other needs that they need outside of that, so they're often isolated, and it worsens. And I see this happening over and over, especially with deafblind people in America, and they will have some of those with dementia, some of those with Alzheimer's, and we're seeing the additional challenges that they're facing. And I feel like the law needs to improve specifically to provide funding to meet some of those needs. Also, you know, there is the need for socialization skills for people who are deaf and blind. What I'm seeing happening, you know, they'll be in their homes, and they'll be in their homes isolated all day with nothing to do. And even people with Alzheimer's, you know, then their world shrinks, their vision worsens, and the sitting around worsens everything even more so. And family members often don't come. Maybe they live too far, and so often they have no one who comes to see them, so they're more isolated, or they're only limited to family. Maybe even their school friends, they are out of the picture, so that isolation worsens. So my question is, what are some expectations we might have specifically for deafblind people in America that we might help deaf senior citizens to improve their personal lives, their inner lives, their socialization skills, and their self-worth? I loved your presentation, and it's making me reflect so much on my experiences in the United States as a deafblind person.
Thank you, Daniel. Divya, maybe you can speak to Daniel afterwards, but we do have to conclude for today because we need time to get to our next session. So thank you very much, Daniel, for your very insightful presentation. It certainly helps us all realize how important that extra existential care is in impacting the lives of people who are deafblind. So thank you very much.
Thank you.